The Shep Naz Podcast begins now.
Welcome to the Shep Naz Podcast. I'm Joe and I'm your host today. If you listened to yesterday's episode, you know that Pastor Joey and I got into a pretty good discussion about honorable living as described in 1 Peter. We didn't have time to finish that conversation, so we're going to jump back into that conversation from yesterday. Here we go. Well, and he kind of even does the same thing in this letter.
Yeah.
He starts out by saying, hey, remember who you are.
He's building them up. Building them up.
And then he's coming to this next piece where he starts saying, okay, so how are you going to do this? Yeah. And you want to go into this next part about his instruction?
So he kind of gives a roadmap for how Christians are to live while in exile. And I think, like we said, if we feel like we're in exile now, and if we were to just make that hypothesis the church has always and will always be in exile, then I think these are some good kind of rules for us too.
Sure.
That this would be a roadmap for how to live while you are in exile. And so we are citizens of the kingdom of God. So everywhere we live, we will technically and theoretically be in exile. So this is
until he returns or he calls us home.
Absolutely.
One of the two.
And so the first thing he says, and so these are just bullet points that he gives. So I'm not adding these.
Right.
I'm not saying like I think this is what it means. These are the literal bullet points that he gives. The first is to abstain from sinful desires. And while that sounds like, well, of course,
right.
I think the word desires is the key piece of this. You can manipulate behavior out of anybody. Right. There's, the Pavlov's dog with the ringing of a bell and wanting a treat. You can manipulate behavior. And I think, in my experience, and I think a lot of people who are listening and watching would say that I think the church has sometimes tried to manipulate behavior because it's what we can see on the outside.
Sure.
And so we try to force that. Stretch Dean, a NY leader, and he's on the East Coast, and he spoke at NYC, 2019, whatever. But he quoted one from when he was a kid in the 80s, and there was a speaker that said, hey, we didn't bring you here to make you good boys and girls. We brought you here so that you have a radical encounter with God. Now, I think Peter's saying, like your behavior matters, like you shouldn't be a jerk. Like you should live right. But what matters more to God is what's on the inside, and these desires are these things that are on the inside.
Well, it's because he's going for the root.
Yeah.
The other stuff is just the fruit.
Yeah.
With the actual time when I'm acting out, if I am just going after the behavior, it's kind of like those old videos of you see people spinning plates on poles where they keep trying to spin one and then the other one's slowing down and they have to keep trying to. Well, that would be if we're just going after the sinful behavior.
Yeah, you can fix it. You can fake it for a while. And sadly, we've seen, in churches, we've seen a lot of pastors fall prey to their sinful desires.
Sure.
Because you can, on the outside, you can fix your behavior for a while. But if you don't deal with the desires that are inside of you, they will eventually come out.
Yeah.
Right? Out of the overflow of the heart, right, is what Jesus says. And so what he's talking about is this idea of holiness. And Pastor Rob talked about it a couple years ago, and he did a great job explaining what we as a church would say this is what holiness looks like. And this is what Peter's talking about. And really what it is, it's less about what we do, although changing the inside does affect then what we do, right? It's this order of operations.
Yes.
And so it is more about God so working inside of you that he changes the desires of your heart to be the desires of his heart for you. And then that informs your behavior. And so you don't, one of the reasons why, you think about the people who are the most loving and the most caring, and you say, man, I just don't understand how they live the way they live. They're so generous, but they're just, well, that's because at one point God has done something inside of them and it has informed their behavior. They didn't start with the behavior, because when you start with the behavior, you create legalists and you create just rigid people. And the second that they mess up, they tend to spiral
Yes.
Because if I'm a person that says that all that matters is what you do, well, if I do something wrong, then I'm no longer loved.
And we kind of got into this very discussion in our small group this past week. And, I was trying to encourage them, like, you understand that the holy life that we're being called to, you can't do it.
Yeah.
You
too much.
Cannot do it.
Yeah.
So we have to approach it a little bit differently, where a lot of times I think when we see instruction that says, okay, abstain from sinful desires. All right, so I think of whatever the temptation is that I normally have or that sin that I normally might go to, and I say, okay, I'm going to try to stop doing that. And I tell myself on a Monday, all right, this week I'm not going to do this. And then whatever it is, Tuesday, Wednesday, maybe Monday afternoon, I don't know, that you fail. And you're like, I'm no good. I'm not really a Christian because I every time I try this, I fail. And the answer is that is exactly why Jesus sent the Spirit. That is why, because we just have to yield to what the Spirit is doing. Yeah. The Spirit is the one that does the sanctification process. Yeah. And to be able to say, okay, instead deal with my heart. Change. So I changed my prayer life. Instead of help me stop doing X, it's like change my heart so I don't want to do that.
Hey everyone, Pastor Nick here. I'm in Johnstown and I'm on site at our brand new Shepherd Church Johnstown campus location. You can see the church here in the background. We've been hard at work getting this thing ready for our launch Sunday, which is going to be happening on Easter, March 31st at 10:45. We'd love to invite you to help us get the word out. We'll be here on that Sunday, March 31st, 10:45. The address is 280 South Main Street, and we hope to see you soon.
Paul talks about this in Galatians chapter 5, which if you've been around church and you've been around, you'll recognize in Galatians 5, Paul goes over what the fruit of the Spirit is. And if you're not familiar, but what he talks about is like, this is what it looks like to live a Spirit-filled life. This is what it looks like to not live a Spirit-filled life. And when you live a Spirit-filled life, things like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, those things exude out of you. And what he says is like those things, the enemy can fake a lot of other stuff. He can fake gifts. He can give people, success. He can give people influence and power. He can't he can't do love. He can only do lust, right? A twisted version of love.
Right.
And so what we have in the fruit of the Spirit is, okay, so if I want to live a Spirit-filled life, if I want this kind of holy life, then I need to figure out what does it look like then to live like that. And I said this in the message, that abstaining from sinful desires isn't just about restraint. It's about actively pursuing God's desires. So how then do you go and you exude love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control? These are the things that if you're actively pursuing those things, then those other desires will go away. And really the root of all of our sinful desires is selfishness.
Sure.
And so actively pursuing God's desires help us to move away from those selfish things. And we all have that selfish tendency in us. Every baby you've ever known's first words are mine and no, and they rip toys out of the hands of their brothers and sisters because they want it. And we don't shame them for that when they're two, because it's natural. It's a natural part of who we are. It's this thing that was born inside of us. We're born selfish. And we have to get to the point where we say, God, I don't want to be that anymore, but I can't figure it out.
Right.
And we live in a culture that has taught us to do the best thing for us.
Yeah. Pursue the selfishness.
And whether that's explicit or implicitly taught, because I think there's also places where we see people like philanthropy, but then it's like a beer company, and it's nothing against beer. Like if you drink beer, it's like whatever. But I loved the around like hurricanes. Beer companies will bottle or they'll can water and they'll send water, right? But they want you to know that they're doing that, so they make a $2 million ad for it.
Right.
It's like,
right.
or you could just send the water and let somebody could post out on social media and be like, hey, great job, insert name of beer company.
Yeah.
But so, I don't know that that's a selfless thing if you're then promoting it, right? And so maybe you would say, well, in the world, we want people to not be selfish too. It's like we say it, but I don't know if we really believe it.
Right.
And so I told this story, and I don't have to go through the whole thing about Psalm 37:4 says to delight yourself in the Lord, and he'll give you the desires of your heart. That same word desires is there, and that the idea isn't that he'll give you your desires, but that his desires will be your desires, then he'll give you those. And that's when you press into God and you actively pursue him, your desires will become the desires he has for you. And like we talked about a couple weeks ago, in sanctification is the truth is it does take some time.
Right.
There's this really great video from the Skit guys and it's an older one, where one person is playing the role of Jesus and another person's just a guy. And the guy playing Jesus has a hammer and a chisel. And he's walking around him, and he's quite literally chiseling away at the person. And the idea being that all through our walk with God, he's working on us, chiseling off those pieces of us that he knows we need to get rid of, but that we can't get rid of ourselves. And it is a journey. And we believe that sanctification, holiness is a process. I also think that's why it's really important to know it's not a behavior thing. That
Right.
behavior can be an indicator, but like I don't walk up to our teenagers who make a mistake like, well, I guess you're just not sanctified.
Yeah.
No, the truth is that's not, I think our denomination specifically, and we could get into church history lessons, I think we messed up 40, 50 years ago in how we taught sanctification. And I think we're doing better now. I really do. I think we've figured out some of the mistakes that we had in the past. And I think there were a lot of reasons for it. It was we swung really hard one way because we were combating, sex, drugs, and rock and roll in the 70s, and
Right.
we wanted to be away from that. But I really do think that we're in a better place now, but it has taken a long time to get us there. I was at a conference last week with NYI Nazarene youth leaders from all over USA and Canada, and a person who was there, who is a pastor in one of our churches, gave a really poor definition of sanctification. And he says, I just think it's really hard to teach kids about Christian perfection because they think means they had to be perfect. I said, well, I don't think you know what it is. And so we're still dealing with some of that, and trying to make sure we understand that it's not about making good boys and girls. It's about having an encounter with God and letting him change us.
Yes.
And that informs behavior later.
Yep.
Behavior follows the heart. And so that's, he's talking about sinful desires. I love this definition. Then we can probably, I don't know if we want to move on. Keith Jury has written like 100 books, and this is one of the books that he wrote. It's called Holiness for Ordinary People. My favorite thing is if you ever get a Keith Jury book, he'll tell you that all you have to do is read the first chapter and the last chapter, because the first chapter introduces everything. The last chapter gives bullet points for the whole book. So if you're ever looking for quick reads, but this is what it says. He says, in short, if you make a total consecration of yourself, God, in cooperation with you, will correct your heart's desires so that your heart becomes 100% devoted to Christ. While you may still fall short in practice, your motives will be saturated only by loving intention. And that is a great definition of sanctification for us, that the desires of your heart would lean toward love and not selfishness. You may still mess up. We're going to make mistakes. right? John Wesley called them traps set by the devil.
Yeah.
Like there will be traps set for us. But if we root our identity in Christ and we have that loving intention, I think we're going to be able to figure out how to live this way to abstain from those sinful desires.
All right. Sounds good. I think we'll cut it off there for now. And we've got a couple more things we want to get into. But since I did the intro,
Sure.
I think it's on you to do the outro.
I can do that.
All right. So here we go.
All right. That's going to wrap up our episode today. See how I did that? We're so thankful for you for listening. If you have any questions, you can get a hold of us, podcast@shepnaz.org. You can also find out everything that's happening. We got so much coming up in the next few weeks. You're not going to want to miss it. So find that on our app, social media pages, of course, at shepnaz.org. He's Joe. I'm Joey. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.
This podcast is a production of the Shepherd Church of the Nazarene, Gahanna, Ohio. Email to podcast@shepnaz.org and let us know what you think.